I grew these hot peppers in my small garden with the plan of turning them into a batch of homemade hot sauce to give to my friends. But since this is a woodworking channel, let's see if I can build a custom gift box to go along with the bottles. Welcome. This is Mason Woodworking. They say that knowing how to build a box is a fundamental skill in woodworking. Why? Because so many projects are really just boxes in different sizes. Everything from a small gift box to the unfinished cabinet this machine is sitting on. I went with two contrasting wood species for this box, walnut and maple. I think they look great together, and honestly, it's what I had lying around. I picked this wood up from my local wood shop a while back. Shout out to KJP Select Hardwoods. Not sponsored. It's in excellent shape, so very little milling is required. This is actually my first time using a jointer. Up until now, I've always relied on hand tools to face and edge joint my stock, along with plenty of sanding. I recently picked up this tabletop 8-inch jointer on sale, so this was a good opportunity to finally put it to use. With smaller joints like this, it's generally best to take light passes, so I've set the depth of cut to around 1/16 or 1/8 of an inch being the absolute max. So you can see the face came out really nice. It was pretty smooth. I'm impressed with this machine so far. Now I'm going to edge joint this, and it shouldn't be too many passes as I recall. Not bad at all. Here I'm checking for square, just proving to myself that I lined up and set this tool up correctly in the first place, since again, it's my first time using it. Looks good to me. What do you guys think? So since I cleaned up one edge on the jointer, now I can do a parallel edge on the table saw. Nice, real nice. At this point, I'm not quite sure what the dimensions are for this box, but I know there's something called the golden ratio, which I keep hearing all over YouTube woodworkers' websites and channels. I'm gonna look that up and at some point and figure it out. So now I'm gonna use my thickness planer, which is typically the final process of milling your lumber. Since I got a clean one face on this board, now I'm going to create a parallel face on the opposite side. And I'm going to clean this up just enough because I want to keep it smooth on both sides, because the goal later, which you'll see, is to make a infinite grain match around the entire box. Again, I'm taking very, very light passes on this wood. I'm not in any rush. It's just a small little gift box that I'm making for a friend. Hopefully, once I get the process down, I'll make a few more of these later on and hand them out, since I did make a few hot sauce bottles. Also, this is a very old, very basic thickness planer, so no need to push it any further than it needs to. She's coming along nicely. Slow and steady. This process really didn't take too long. And normally I probably wouldn't show this entire process, but it's my first video, so why not? You can see there's a little bit left to plane on the end. One or two passes I think would finish this off. And because I'm taking light passes, it's actually making the face very smooth. Almost, it's going to require a lot less sanding later on. And here's a shot in some better lighting so you can see the actual grain on this wood. It's not bad. I kind of like it. Just a little sample piece of wood that I had lying around, and it came out very nice. This is a new one for me. I'm going to attempt to find the middle with this gauge here. I'm going to flip the gauge around on both sides so we can get the center of the board, with the intent on using my table saw to split the wood right down the middle, at least most of it. I did a rough sketch on my notepad based on the dimensions of the hot sauce bottle, and using this golden ratio, and then realized that I should probably cut this to the right height first before I split this wood down the middle. So what the heck is this golden ratio I keep talking about? In design, apparently, there is a thing called the golden ratio, which is more of a design aesthetic. It covers many aspects of design, but in woodworking, approximately 1.618 to 1 is the golden ratio. The design principle is used to create furniture and structures and with naturally pleasing proportions, often represented by a Greek letter phi. It serves as a mathematical shortcut to balance form, aesthetics in a project. All that to say is that I ended up with a box which is about 5.5 inches by 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches. So here I'm confirming that the height or the thickness of this walnut is 3.5 inches, which it is, luckily. This doesn't include what I'm going to use for the top and bottom, which is the maple, but essentially the box is roughly those dimensions. At least that's the hope. Now I'm using my marking gauge again to find the rough middle of this board, and I'll identify that with a white pencil that I have so I can see it clearly, and then split this wood right down the middle. Now I'm going to line up my center line to the blade and try to get a nice clean cut. The goal here is to cut it almost through, but not quite through. I'm going to leave a little piece there that I can safely cut on the bandsaw later on. If I try to cut this all the way through, well, that could end up in a little disaster. then I flip the board and do it again. Again, not all the way through, just up to a certain point, just enough that I can bring it over the bandsaw and cut the remaining. I'm sure I could have taken off a little more so that I left a smaller gap between the cuts, but I'm happy with this. I'm comfortable with this. This will work. Now I'm taking this to the bandsaw, setting it up. I'm going to try to line up that blade as close as possible to the dead center and rip that little strip off. I sped this up a little bit, but it didn't take me too long since that little strip wasn't too thick. In reality, this took about a little over a minute at real time, real pace, and a slow pace to get through this piece of wood. Now over to the thickness planer to clean up that center section and to get the right thickness. I believe I was going for about a 1/4 inch for each side. Wow, look at all that sawdust. This is what happened when you have an older planer. No dust collection, but it does do a very good job at cleaning up that piece of wood. And now you have it. This is what a book matched piece of wood looks like. So side by side, looks like a Rorschach picture. End to end is where you get the infinite grain. So no matter which end I put this board on, I should be able to connect the grains and it should flow all the way through, giving you that waterfall effect. After going back and forth on which pattern looks the best, now I'm going to measure the width and length. So there'll be a continuous connection between the two pieces of wood. This is the short side followed by the long side on one piece of wood, and then I'll go to the other piece of wood and do the long side, then the short side. So I've already set my blade to 45 degrees, and one trick I've picked up, I've seen others you do this as well, is have a backing piece on my push block, whatever you want to call it, so that is pre-cut. This way I can see exactly where the blade's going to cut, and I can line up my board to that pre-cut line on the backing piece of wood. Also helps prevent tear out. I'm sure there's many ways to do this step. I could have cut these individual sections at a 90-degree first, and then gone back and changed the blade to 45 degrees, and etc., etc. But trying something new. I'm starting to label each section so I can keep track of the grain match. It'll save me some sanity later. It's a tight grain board, so it's a little difficult to see until they're put together. You can see after I've made that first cut, now I'm realizing that with each cut I'm losing a little bit more wood, so I'll have to remeasure and adjust to ensure that I keep the same dimensions from my rough sketch. But not a problem, I got extra wood for a reason. This is probably the reason why some people would first cut these sections at 90 degrees first and then do the 45-degree miter. But whatever, I'm having fun. Hopefully it's showing up on the camera, but you can see now the grain is coming along and matching up nicely, piece by piece. Here's a better shot of the grain matching on all four pieces. I can move the end piece to either side and the grain should match either way. Here I'm using a straight edge, basically a ruler, to align all the pieces together, and I'm going to use a whole bunch of green masking tape to hold the boss together like a clamp, as well as on the inside to avoid any squeeze out that I'll have to deal with later on. Excessive amount of tape for a clean job later on, I'm okay with that. Here I'm on the final thickness planing step of milling the maple, and it's basically the same as what I did with the walnut. Now I'm applying the maple top and bottom. Once the glue dries, I'm going to route these at the table to clean up the edges, because I made these panels slightly oversized so you can have a nice clean fit on the box. So, like I said, the maple is slightly overhanging by an eighth of an inch or so. So on purpose, so that I can clean this up on the router. What I should have done is added a backing so that I wouldn't get so much of a tear out at the end, but it's okay. I did a little cleanup as best I could after I finished routing. Just a quick sanding, clean up the edges and the corners before I do the next step. I believe I started with 80 grit and probably went to 100 grit before I stopped. It was not necessary to fully clean this up before the next step. I'm measuring the depth of the lid that I want. I don't recall exactly, but it's probably about an inch and a half, or maybe an inch from the top. And then for the next part, which is a little scary, since I put all this time into this little tiny box, is to cut the lid off. A mistake here means I could ruin my project. I thought about cutting this at the bandsaw, but I find I can't get a perfectly straight cut yet. I'll work on that later, but I find the table saw gives me a perfectly straight cut. And like before, I'm only going to cut partly through this box. I'll finish it up on the bandsaw for a safe finish cut. More sanding to clean up those little bits left by the table saw slash bandsaw, and to get a nice clean fit on the box lid. I don't know about anyone else, but I actually like sanding. I hear a lot of woodworkers say they hate it, maybe because it seems too tedious, but it's my moment to turn my brain off and think about nothing but the sanding. Using my thin strip jig that I found on Amazon, I'm going to custom an inner liner, you could say, for the box, and this liner will also help keep the lid on. The thin strips were a little too thin for the thickness planer, so time to pull out a hand tool for the first time. And I'm just going to remove that tiny little strip in the middle, and I'll eventually give it a quick sanding, and I can use it for the inner liner of the box. I must have missed recording this part, but I eventually just cut these pieces to form fit within the box, little by little, taking small chunks out of it until it fit. Now I'm going to protect the box with a little general finish on the outside, just the outside of the box. I'll put it on not too thick with this brush, and then I'll wipe it off the excess. And after it dries, I'll do a little sanding in between coats, but not too much. There's probably, I think, only 2 coats on this little box. Now you're starting to see the grain pop with the finish on the wood, and hopefully you can also see the grain matching going around the corners. And you can see that hot sauce bottle is waiting for its new home.